Hello. How are y'all doing? It's good to hear. So I think it's been since like April that we've had a reading. We took a nice long summer break, and now that summer is ending. It's hotter than Hades, so thank you for coming out in literally 100-degree heat. As I always like to say, I never take for granted that there are actual human beings showing up in the flesh to a poetry reading on a weekday evening. So thanks for coming. As always, my usual quick shout outs to members of the St. Louis Poetry Center. If you would like to become one and you are not one, we have a QR code on the table in the back, and you can pick up some information. You can talk to me, you can talk to Aaron. Before you head out, please do that. Thanks as always to the Missouri Arts Council and the Regional Arts Commission for funding this and other programming. We are very thankful to them. And thanks as always to the Focal Point for keeping the light on for us. I was checking out some of the stuff on the wall and didn't realize they've been in existence in some form or fashion since 1975. So it's pretty amazing for an organization this tiny and this dedicated to this kind of programming to be in existence for that long and to make it. So we're really glad they're still here and pumping. Some quick announcements about some events coming up. Observable, which is our sister reading at the Poetry Center. We have Travis Masadi and Nikki Hurd coming up on September 23rd. I'm getting nodding heads in the audience, so that means I got it down correctly. And then I'm also really pumped about Eduardo Corral and Stephen Schroeder on November 18th. That is going to be a really killer reading. Eduardo is new to WashU, and we're thrilled to have him in St. Louis and connected to the Poetry Center. We are still working on getting those Sunday workshops on the calendar, so keep your eyes peeled on our social medias and our website. We will get those up as soon as we can. Wanted to mention also on September 26th, High Noon, which is a program that the Kranzberg puts on at the High Low. On September 26th, the Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts is putting on an event having to do with banned poems in honor of Banned Books Week. So I've heard that was pretty fantastic in the past, so definitely check that out. Okay, I think that's all the events I have. Quick housekeeping. Bathrooms, if you are in person here at the Focal Point, are out this door to the left and then to the right. You can check those out. I didn't know until this evening when we showed up that they have finally put in a new restaurant next door. It's like a fourth different Mexican restaurant. Let's hope this one sticks. They are called Sabroso. And Aaron checked with them, and they are cool, as their predecessors in that space have been, with you going over, buying a drink, purchasing food and drink, maybe just drink, from your local establishment, your local restaurant, bringing it over here. Just make sure you're taking glassware back as need be. So please check that out if you like. I also want to mention in the back on the table, Mark and Melissa, our readers this evening, have put together a packet of their poetry. So feel free while I'm blabbing away to go grab a copy of that. They wanted to make sure that you have that. If you don't want it while they read, that's fine too. You can grab it on the way out. But they wanted to make sure you have that so you can check that out while they're reading. If you're watching this on 27th, oh, I lost track of the day. Thank you. August 27th, right? You also had like 3 different things when I asked that question. On Facebook Live, on YouTube, I'm really glad you're here online. Please comment, share, etc. Keep momentum going for these poets and for the Poetry Center. I think that's it. So I'm going to kick us off with a poem, which I have been trying to do for a while now. And I have every intention of reading a different poem, but I realized earlier today that I think I've read it before, and it has to do with when you become a parent, you realize what it means to that you would potentially kill a human being. You would kill a human being in defense of your child. It has been on my mind a lot, and this microphone is kind of going in and out, so there we go. How's that? Yeah. I'm going to hold it very, very lightly. Needless to say, I've been thinking a lot about boys and men as it relates to being a father raising a boy. And instead of reading a poem about what it means to understand that you would kill a human being after you become a father, I'm going to read this. It's a little lower key than that, although the title is, and I strongly recommend this book if you've never read through it, Terrence Hayes' American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. Each poem has the same title. So, American sonnet for my past and future assassin. Sometimes the father almost sees looking at the son, how handsome he'd be if half his own face was made of the woman he loved. He almost sees in his boy's face an openness like a wound before it scars, who he was long before his name was lost, the trail to his future on earth long before he arrived, to be dead and alive at the same time. A son finds his father handsome because the son can almost see how he might become superb as the scar above a wound. And because the son can see who he was long before he had a name, the trace of his future on earth long before he arrived. Right? All right. So I'm going to introduce these poets, and I'm going to move very gently. I'm going to introduce these poets, and then they are going to kind of do things a little bit differently. Where instead of having kind of one short set from one poem or one poet, and then another short set from the other poet, they're kind of going to alternate back and forth. So that should keep it pretty interesting this evening. So I'm going to introduce both of them, and then I'll ask them both to come up. Okay. So Melissa Qualls has taught in the English department at Lindenwood University since 2002 and earned her MFA in creative writing in 2018. She lives in Webster Groves with her husband, 2 daughters, and their 2 pampered cats. Her poetry explores the coexistence of pain and beauty in everyday life. And most recently, her poem, They Look So Small Lying There, won 2nd honorable mention at the 2024 Wednesday Club Original Poetry Competition. And Mark W. Kumming has a master's degree in English. He volunteers with the St. Louis Poetry Center, I've heard of them, and also raises money for Circle of Concern Food Pantry in Valley Park. He facilitates the Babbler Poetry Society, a collection of St. Louis poets who write poetry and read one another's work. He is deeply indebted to his spouse of 47 years, Deborah. Their marriage is as old as I am. Mark is also a finalist for this year's SLPC NASH contest with his fantastic poem, Breakfast. I think I put that one in there. So anyway, please welcome Melissa and Mark to the stage.
Is it on? Okay. So our theme tonight is poems out of nowhere. Sometimes poems sneak up on you, they waylay you, maybe they even smack you in the face during the most banal moments of daily life. Maybe you're on a walk, or in the middle of a conversation, or even cleaning out your secret bedroom drawer, and suddenly you have a feeling so strong, a memory so vibrant, or an image so striking, you have to pause a moment and write them down.
Those moments when we're not searching for it, it seems as though the poem is searching for you and ultimately finds you. Psychological science calls this flow. The Buddhists refer to it as Zen. But Elizabeth Gilbert, you all may be familiar with her writing, has written a book called Big Magic, in which she dedicates the first quarter of the book to inspiration and finding it. I highly recommend that read for you if you are involved in any kind of the arts.
So what we'd like to do is present to you tonight poems as we've experienced them. Poems that ask you to follow a trail of lyrical and symbolical breadcrumbs, where a wandering possum leads to the birth of a daughter, or a conversation with a sister leads to loss. These are the poems that have presented themselves to us, almost whole, without just the right words, easy rhythms and in rhymes, and of course, clear and vivid images. Does that help if we hold it like that? Oh, twisty. Thank you.
As Kenneth explained, we are going to read alternatingly tonight, and there are copies of our poems available to you. We feel that hearing a poem and seeing it at the same time just engages more senses and enriches the poem, the experience of the poem itself. I'm going to open up with my poem called Happy Dog, and this is a good example of what we've been describing about a poem from nowhere. Except this one's from Forest Park. Happy Dog. I walked today in Forest Park. The cool of the morning makes even the dogs happy. They skitter ahead, trot back, tails a-flail and tongues a-loll. Faces bright with expectation, mindless of leash. In me it is the same. I feel so forward and forthcoming. I imagine my face radiant with invitation, though I keep my tongue in. I engage eye to eye every passerby and say good morning with no expectation of greeting, but heart-filling, flooding like the happy dogs. If we make eye contact, the urge in me to invite the striding stranger to sit a bit and talk. A dog knows it's alive when it's petted, knows its purpose when it wags.
So as a mother of 2 daughters and a full-time teaching gig and an old house in Webster Groves that needs constant attention, sometimes life is really overwhelming and it sometimes feels like we don't have the time or space for poetry. But every once in a while, I have a moment that's all by myself, all alone. Maybe I'm taking a shower, or in this instance, cleaning out a drawer in my bedroom dresser, because in my life, I don't know about yours, I don't want to judge, but in my life, every drawer becomes a junk drawer. There is no such thing as a drawer that's meant for just one purpose, everything. And so this moment, I was in my bedroom cleaning out the junk drawers, and I came across 2 small jewelry boxes, one with Charlotte and one with Nora's name. And this is a poem that came almost whole. I don't think I've revised one word in it since I wrote it down. It's called They Look So Small, Lying There. Cast-off jewelry boxes hide in my dresser, filled with my daughter's teeth, yellowed, shrunken, rattling with neglect. With each new loss, we pluck bloodied contributions from under pillows and make midnight deposits into these banks of shrinking mortality. Now and then, when I spot blackheads dotting my teen's nose, or when my youngest rushes past me to join friends, I lock the door, open the lids, and let their teeth drop year by year into my waiting hand.
So lately, I've been living at the altar of image. I think a poem with an image helps a reader grasp onto it. It was Ezra Pound who said a poem has 3 things. It has music, it has logic, and it has image. We'll talk a little bit more about each one of those is. But my next poem is called Awe. Not awe, and not but awe. You've all experienced that feeling, I'm sure. What I'd like for you to do as I'm reading and as you're following along, grab onto an image, any image. Poem doesn't have to mean, but the image can anchor you to it. This is called awe. I spotted it on the sidewalk, the glint of it. Sunlight ricocheting off the brilliance of someone's awe. Someone who'd lost it. Let it fall from a pocket crowded with keys, loose change, tissue. Everyday cares like lunch, rent. Losing awe is as quick as a shadow cast. The light blinking right out of it. I picked it up anyway and looked around, spotting rectangles and rectangles on facades of facades, striving suits and skirts full of sticks and straw. Pinching it between my thumb and forefinger, I secreted it into my pocket. like a found coin, touching it every so often as a reminder.
This next poem for me happened on a solitary walk. Sometimes where stuff just comes to me. I actually texted it to my sister as I was walking, which I don't suggest. It was a little bit dangerous, a little bit of a trip hazard. But this is a poem for my eldest daughter, Nora. This is a poem dedicated to her. It's called For Nora. A possum waddles past me on my nightly walk, silver white under streetlights, so haphazard in its scuttling, I am startled still. And then suddenly, I am on another sidewalk and another neighborhood with you, almost two. No longer scooting along on your big wheels, mesmerized instead by the two near possum giving birth. Tiny pink pups sliding out beneath her tail with ease. One by one, they cling to her fur, inching their way up to the dark protection of her pouch as she climbs her way to safety in the rusted gutters of the abandoned brick house. Your birth was not so easy. No sliding for you, pulled instead from my sectioned stomach, tangled in the cord that had until then given you life. For months, I had dreams you would come out a furred animal with needle teeth and ready claws. Even then, wishing you the strength and fierceness all women need to survive.
So Pound mentioned that logic was important to a poem. So what do we mean by logic? Well, that's just story, tale. That's how poetry began, right around the campfire, people telling stories. And so if we can establish a story, it doesn't have to be the story. It's just a story that a reader can connect to. I think it makes the poem much more accessible. This next poem of mine is called Ash. It has a story in it. My sisters seemed tall back then, and somehow better as I remember. So when I saw Mother after such a long time, I didn't know how she'd shrunk so. I saw the top of her head, and I never could before. The white skin there. She'd called me, and when I arrived, she opened the door to hand me a piece of paper with an address on it. I broke off staring when she says, "He died there. Would I go get him? Just Ash now." You could tell it was somebody by the bone pieces and a couple of white chips that looked like teeth. I took the bag of him anyway, and the grainy gray ash in it like a dried meal. I knocked and she bid me come in this time. I put him in a shoebox and wrapped twine around it both ways to make a kind of cross on the top. But I didn't know him to be religious. And besides, it kind of looked like a present.
So this next one, maybe some of you can identify with. If you're a parent and a poet, inspiration strikes you anywhere, and if you're lucky enough to have a child with misbegotten teeth, a lot of that happens in the orthodontist office. And so this one too is a little bit of a departure. I'm usually a free verse poet, but this one is in terza rima form, which is in part due to my MFA professor at the time. He was teaching a sonnet class, and he was admittedly a little bit of an arrogant, yes, he was a little arrogant. And he told us, you should avoid trying to terza rima because it's just too hard for you. For all of you, it's just too much. Because not only is it 10 syllables in a iambic pentameter, but it has a difficult rhyming scheme. It's an A, B, B, C, B, C, D, C. So you rhyme the first and third lines, but then that second line needs to be the first and third rhymes of the second stanza. It's very complicated, and he was sure that none of us could do it. So this was for him. Yeah, a little condescending. Yeah. So and this is to show that sometimes the content of a poem comes easily. You know exactly what you want to say, but sometimes fitting it into a certain form takes a little bit of careful concentration. This is also wabi-sabi, the title. Wabi-sabi is an ancient Japanese philosophy that emphasizes beauty and imperfection and impermanence and simplicity. So if a potter, for example, creates a bowl and there's a crack, instead of throwing that bowl away, you might edge that crack in gold. And to me, it's a beautiful reminder that what we consider beautiful is sometimes in what is not perfect. So wabi-sabi, this is for Charlotte, my 15-year-old now. The nurse stretches your mouth with plastic hooks, taking pictures of teeth crooked and bent. Your eyes open wide. Whoops. Here we go. Sending startled looks as she recites upper arch deficient and crossbite, crowded, insufficient space. But don't worry, she smiles. Our resident dentist will pull, expand, and then erase any flaws that you have. She dismisses us. We wait. I peer at your downcast face and add this hope to my list of wishes, that he leave one tooth crooked and brave. Like your raucous laugh, your sloppy kisses, your singing off-key. Know this to be true. There's beauty, my child, in your imperfections too.
Talk about image. Who hasn't been to the dentist and had that happen? But tonight our themes are varied. Poems from nowhere. We've talked a lot about image, some wonderful images in Melissa's poem. We also have alternate sense poems. We have poems that read but can feel and can hear. We're working on smell, but we haven't got there quite yet. Although some of my poems stink, but this poem came as a surprise in keeping with our theme. It's called Blue Chevy Bel Air. Every May or June, you hear stories where cars challenge railroad locomotives and usually lose. This happened about a year ago, and I was inspired to write this poem, which is based on a memory. This event occurred in 1968. I hadn't thought about it since then. It's called Blue Chevy Bel Air. Stan Bodie was in the car. Months later at school, arms still in a sling, one eye patched, limping between classes. His older brother Stephen was the one to die. At the gated railroad crossing by the neighborhood pool, those of us swimming on that suburban summer day heard the familiar chimes of the crossing gates as they lowered, warning of the approaching freight train. Then sounds made loud by never having been heard before drew me dripping to the fence. Blasts and blares of horns, shearing metal, squeals and screeches of skidding wheels, fountains of snapping sparks. The massive locomotive plowing the blue Chevy Bel Air sideways down the track.
Hello? Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Okay, so this poem goes out to all the animal lovers out there. Washington Post had an article about the secret ways children can know which one was their parents' favorite. It's whatever name you have or birth date you have embedded in your password. So yes, everybody's. Mine happens to be my dead cat Sherman. So I don't know what that says. But I think my children might be a little offended if they knew that. So this is a poem dedicated to my cat Sherman, big, fluffy, 22-pound, wonderful companion for our family for many, many years. It's called Wednesday Afternoon, April 4th. I'm leading my children around the backyard, searching for the best place to bury the cat. A man on the garage roof pauses, gutter in hand, watching, as we pick a spot near the back, shaded by a large overhanging shrub under the ivy that has overtaken all else. Through the open back door, Sherman wanders outside, listing, unsure, a long line of stringy spit hanging from his mouth. Cancer won't let him swallow. He blinks in the new spring sun. In a few days, I will carry his heavy, still body to the hole my husband now digs, careful to support his limp head, the way I somehow knew, as if by instinct, to carry my newborns home.
It's really okay to applaud. We like that feedback, don't we? You know, I've been-
Well, it's better than booing.
Actually, what's worse is this.
Yeah.
You a reading or, anyway, thank you for that. Again, logic. This next poem, You're a Lucky One. You know, if it weren't for family, we poets wouldn't probably have anything to write about. But this is a good opportunity for you, if you're reading along with me, to grab onto just one thing. This is, again, a story, not the story. It's called You're a Lucky One. But there was enough of us that one day, Pa said, we just have to find our own way. His place at the table empty next morning. My sister Ocala found hers to a man who lived 100 miles away, she said. Back then, that was the moon to me. Emmett got shot in the leg hunting rabbits. Doctors shortened it because it wouldn't heal right, so he limped some. Nobody told why Ruby died. Her place at the table sat empty, none of us going there. Emmett's twin, all the time acted angry at the nothing, swinging her fists and kicking her feet, until Sheriff Allen come with some men on a Saturday and took her with him. Mother'd been away birthing Jasper, and when they come home, she bid me come down to where she built the fire. It was cold and darkening, and she waved her hand for me to hurry. I remember because it was only me. The fire crackled and hissed, flames licking the air. You're a lucky one, she said, her jaws clenched tight, like she was trying to keep her teeth in.
So this next poem from me took place in my younger sister's kitchen. So again, family, right? A rich source for poetry, for sure. Her youngest and last child was breech, and she was very anxious. She didn't want to have a C-section, but she knew since I had to, she knew I was the person to turn to. So this is a poem about my sister. It's called Mother's Day. Can I see, whoops, sorry everybody. Can I see what it looks like? She asks. So I pull up my shirt and lower my pants just below the pink edged scar. Her fingers skimmed lightly the numb, jagged border through which my children first saw light. Her own unborn son is curled up, bottom first, a breach of contract, the fourth and final child, or rather, her fifth, if you count Grace, who was never born, at least not alive. At the time, my mother asked, why didn't she have a C-section? I would want to be knocked out, cold. But my sister was awake when she gave birth to Grace, or rather, when she gave death. She knew then, as so many of us know, no matter how our babies leave the womb, there's always a scar.
Can I do this? Hi, Ewan. Hi, Eli. Hi, Eleanor. That's my grandchildren. They're tuned in, which is cool. Yeah. Before I read my last poem, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Kenneth for curating this program for us tonight and helping us. Aaron Quick of the St. Louis Poetry Center. If you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, please join. Babbler Poetry Society. This is an offshoot from Poetry in the Woods. And we meet on a monthly, I'm doing a commercial, we meet on a monthly basis and we just do this. We read each other's poetry and we talk about it. And it has been a great source of inspiration for me. And a lot of my poems have been improved immensely by the valuable feedback from people like Travis and Kristen and Aaron and Michael. Anyway, back to the altar. So thank you. And also thank all of you for being here. I should mostly say that because it's 100 degrees outside. And all of you in studio land, thank you. This poem is, again, I'm at the altar of image here. This is called Breakfast. Microphone, please. This is called Breakfast. I am the one in uniform, white belt, brass buckle, keys on a clip that tinkle. I am the one who wields them, their tufts of hair, their veined and scabby scalps, head lying one shoulder or the other. Wheel them through doors, odors of urine, and a musk of pine sol and bacon. Wheel them down a dim, echoey corridor that narrows and vanishes in the dark. Yellow lamplight paints pyramids on the walls and pools in dull half moons on the floor. I wheel one after the other, flour sacks of spidery arms and knobbed knees, laboring to follow one breath with another. I wheel them into a line before the pine doors of the dining room, closed and locked until the appointed hour. I wheel them in silence. Only the gummed soles of my white shoes shush and squeak on the linoleum. And I park them side by side, their backs to the blank wall.
Ms. Mark, who convinced me to include this next poem, which I'm not sure still qualifies as a poem. We're going to have a debate about this one, but I think you talked about it before. Sometimes it's a really striking image that will inspire poetry. Sometimes it's a possum. Sometimes it's your sister lightly touching your skin. But sometimes it's a sound. And so this one poem was inspired. I was taking a walk in Tower Grove Park, and a bicycle came towards me. And it was one of those old, really creaky bicycles. And I had a sudden, intense memory of when I was teaching in South Korea. I went there for a year after I graduated from college. I taught English. And this is the poem that was inspired by the sound of that creaky bike. It's called Walking Down the Sidewalk in Daejeon, South Korea. He wasn't wearing a dark overcoat or stalking me in a rusty station wagon. So maybe that's why I didn't realize what he was doing until he wobbled on his creaking bike closer to me. He wobbled because only one hand steered, the other pumping his half-erect penis. Gray hairs poked from the open fly of his dirty pants, and his face was unevenly shaven. His lips mumbled, leered. He careened toward me, thunking ever closer. My feeble attempts at running didn't stop him, and my horrified whimpers of no didn't stop him, until I remembered where I was and yelled in borrowed words, "Ani, ajashi." Was it the Korean command, "Ani, no," coming from my American mouth? Was it the endearment, "ajashi," uncle? Startled, he turned and pedaled away, zipping as he left. then waved with defiled hand goodbye, as if leaving a conversation or a friend.
I think that's the best one of the night. I mean, we'll have a discussion. And we're all done.
Ready? All right. All right. Let's get these stools together.
You want to be in the middle, Kenneth?
Oh, sure. It's always nice and awkward for me to be right in the middle.
Love it.
First of all, I should say, because I didn't at the very beginning, because I was so nervous because it had been so many months. Hi, I'm Kenneth. My pronouns are he and him, and I run this here poetry reading for the most part. I'm really glad you're here. We tend to have a Q&A at the end of our reading, and this evening will be no exception. So if things have popped into your mind as these poets have been reading, or as we've been talking about things, please just very informally raise your hand. Let me know what you want to talk about, what you want to ask these folks. Similarly, online, you can post in the comments, and Aaron, you can interrupt me or text me, whatever works, and we'll get this conversation going. So I want to start off by asking you both, when I was kind of reading through your bios, just noticed both of you at some point have taught at the university level. And have masters in English, and so I just want to start there. I remember back in the early aughts. Okay, on the count of 3, we're all going to cast a positive magic spell on this microphone. We're going to say abracadabra. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
Abracadabra.
Okay. It seems to have worked.
Yes.
Back in the early aughts, my 6-year-old would call it ye olde times. I remember having a conversation with Aaron Ballou, a poet many of you know, and I was thinking about getting a master's so that I could maybe eventually teach. And at that time, it was just beginning to get to the point where a master's degree was not really a terminal degree to teach at the university level. And now it's absolutely not. That's my sense of things. So I guess my question for you is, what is the value in that graduate degree for you in your mind now versus perhaps then? How has that shifted for you? You've been nodding back a lot, so I'm gonna pick on you to start.
Well, it sort of just, when I went to Korea, I was in Korea because I was an English major, but also a philosophy and religion major, and became really interested in Buddhism and wanted to see Buddhism in action, because there's a difference, of course, in Buddhism from a theoretical lens, an academic lens, and then Buddhism practiced by normal, everyday people. And I had an incredible time and probably would have kept doing that, except my older sister had a baby. And I have 3 sisters, they're all in St. Louis. We're incredibly close, and that pull of family was very strong. Plus, I really miss libraries. When you're in a university, Kristen's nodding her head, when you're in a university and you just walk into a library and you're around some of the smartest people you've ever met, Chris Scribner, Jeff Smith, Chris Smith, you're all on that list. It's kind of, I just never wanted to leave. And so I went back to get my master's because I didn't want to leave college, and then I started teaching college because I didn't want to leave college. So it's basically, I've stayed an adolescent my whole life. Is that what you wanted to hear? So, and I told this to Kristen too, because I think she's getting a PhD. And, the world of higher education right now, it can be an intimidating one, it can be a scary one. But I really do believe that if you're passionate and you're talented, and it shows. And being in the classroom and teaching I can't imagine a better job. I get to go in tomorrow and we're going to talk about Kumming. Come on, that's the best day ever, So I think there's still quite a bit of value. I think that sometimes I never had a plan ever about what my life was going to look like. I'm absolutely shocked my life looked the way that it does right now. But I think it was just loving what I was doing, and it kind of worked out that way for me, at least.
Cool. What about you?
So for me, the master's degree was incidental. It was stepping stone. My poem Breakfast is about a job I had right out of high school. You can imagine where I was doing that sort of work out of high school. That like opened my eyes to a whole different world that little suburban Mark never was exposed to before. The master's degree allowed me to teach English as a second language and talk about opening my eyes to a whole different world. I was fortunate to teach Japanese students and Korean students, Iranian students, and to learn as much from them, if not more from them, than I'm sure they learned from me. But without the master's degree, I wouldn't have been able to teach ESL.
I love it. I love it. I want to transition a little bit because you started gushing a little bit about just being a teacher. So I might have creeped on your page a little bit. And this semester you're teaching existentialism, absurdity, angst, and the meaning of life. And then next semester you're teaching gender, body, mind, and power. So first of all, I'm wondering if I can sneak in on these courses for free.
Yes.
And second, I want to talk about the relationship between your teaching life and your writing life. If those inform each other in some way. I mean, in my mind, there is a sphere, or there's a Venn diagram where they overlap, but I'm curious as to what that overlap is for you.
I think when in existentialism, we talk a great deal about how being is often like human being. We think of that as a noun, like a permanent thing, right? And yet we really should be thinking of it as a verb, and that you are a verb. You're constantly changing. There is not one moment where you're the same. Every experience changes you. Every choice you make changes you. And until the moment of your last breath, you are constantly becoming. And I think that this, for me, has been a way for me to bring that to light. I allow them a lot of creativity in the classroom. And so instead of maybe writing a formal, analytical, literary essay, I allow them to create visual projects. Some of them write songs based on the literature that they're reading. And it's that creative process, that interpretive creative process, that I think is just, Simone de Beauvoir says that's where we find our greatest levels of human sort of satisfaction, right, is in that creative process. And it doesn't even matter, obviously it doesn't really matter if what you produce isn't that good. It's just that process of creation is really, I think, at the heart of what it means to be a human. It's what can differentiate us from other animals, right? And I know a lot of people might think of it as a waste of time or it's meaningless. To me, it's everything. And so by showcasing that for students and also just being up here, being so vulnerable, we're asking our students to be that vulnerable all the time. When they turn in paper, when they do their own writing, when they're creating for me a project, how can I look them in their face and say, this is worth the risk if I'm not willing to risk the same, the same fears and the same possibility of failure myself. Yep.
Do you have any thoughts on that too? Trying to work the magic spell again.
No, I'd like another question, please.
Okay. Another question. I'm going to ask you about Babbler Poetry Society because I wanted you to dig a little bit more into detail about because for me, I'll be the first to say I've sort of, and I think I even was talking with y'all about this earlier this evening. I've over the course of my time living in St. Louis, which is about 30 years now, rough give or take, I've really kind of come and gone with like communities of poets. We can be pretty weird in a lot of ways. And I was going to make a Harris Falls joke. I won't make one. I promise won't make a political joke tonight. But I want to know about what is the ins and outs of creating a community like that? Because it doesn't just happen from scratch. You can't just invite folks and they show up. Like, tell me about taking it from point A till now. What is the work involved?
Babbler Poetry Society is an offshoot from Poetry in the Woods. About 34 of us gathered about this time last year out in the woods and wrote and listened to and talked about poetry and got so enthused, got in rare air out there, heard wolves howl. That's how rare the air was. And when it was over, it was a vacuum. It was like, no, this can't end. So we just started talking and saying, yeah, I'd like to get together, let's do it. And then by end of November, we had enough names and emails that I sent out an invitation to join us on Zoom. We had about 18 people respond. That's the need, I think, that is felt out there for poetry. One of the surprises I've had in getting back into poetry is how many of us are doing it. There are so many venues, so many people writing poetry that it's wonderful. I think it speaks to one of my other ulterior motives for Banal Poetry Society, and that's bringing people together. That's unity. My little political comment is that we live in a world, I'm speaking to the choir here, highly divisive. And anything I can do to bring 2, 3, 5, 8 people together to talk about something that we love, it's just genuinely fun and enlivening and invigorating. And we hope to keep it going. We've met on Zoom a couple times, that's where we got started, but we've met at Tower Grove Park. We've met at Bambler Park, our namesake. We've hosted readings at Chimera Teas down in Tower Grove East. And we'll keep doing those things as long as there's 2 other people besides me who want to sit down and talk about poetry. We'll be there. If you're interested in joining us, please make sure I get your email address because I'll send you an invitation to our next event, which probably won't be till November. We want to make plenty of space for poetry in the woods.
Awesome, thank you for that. Yeah, definitely divisive. Did you see how everybody froze up when I barely mentioned politics?
Yes.
Did you notice that? Yeah, it's cool. I want to talk a little bit about just the poetry itself for a minute. As I was kind of thumbing through the packet there, I noticed that, I mean, give or take, right? A few lines here, I mean, they all fit on one page, all the poems. I mean, there's a reason that the sonnet has lasted so for hundreds of years. It's a pretty good size unit for a poem, right? So my question is, how much of that is intentional going in? I would say 90% of the poems I've ever written in my life are probably roughly that length too, just because it feels right, but I know not every poet feels that way about their poetry. So I'm curious how much of that is forethought and how much of that is just, oh, looky there. It ended up about the same has the same flow and the same time frame as it has before. You want to take a shot?
Yeah, I have strong feelings about this. I feel like that if you can't, this is my project, but if you can't say something and connect with a reader in the length of a sonnet in 20 lines or 25 lines, go write a short story. We are being, sadly, taught now to read short. So I think it's important for me anyway to write short. And if I can punch you in the gut in 20 lines, I will have succeeded.
What about you?
I think for me, I worry sometimes because I don't write longer poems, and I think, do I just not have a lot to say? Is that what's going on here? But I think because it's my poetry always starts. I'm a very much of a memoirs poet. Everything that I write about has happened. You know, to me, it's based on a memory. It's based on a conversation, and I think what I'm trying to do is capture the moment as much as possible. And if anything, maybe they're too long. You know, maybe they need to be briefer because that moment is like a little haiku, like little butterfly wings that I'm trying to, you know, capture between my fingertips and put in my back pocket. And so, I think for me, that's the power of poetry. And I know, and maybe I suffer from attention span deficit like everybody else, but I know if a poem lasts too long, it has to work pretty hard to keep my attention. And maybe that's through sectioned poems, maybe it's a slight change in the theme or the tone so that my attention doesn't waver. But if it's too long, I'm not gonna make it through. Unless, you know, it's like Howl or something, then okay, fine. You know, if you're an amazing poet, then I'll be there for the journey. But for the most part, I think short and impactful is something that I personally like to read. So it's something that I write.
Got it. I got. Well, first of all, anything popping to mind out here in the crowd? I'm going to ask these folks one more question, then we'll kind of move towards our typical closing ritual couple of questions. But please interrupt me with your hands in a moment. I want to dig into your poems again, and that you read this evening, and say, and I want to be careful because I feel like I've had conversations with other poets where this can feel tense, but there is, folks have a lot of strong feelings about how, just even using the word accessible, like your poetry is accessible, can be like a condescending thing to say. So I really try to steer away from that and talk about generosity. How generous are you to your readers, right? And I'm just noticing in a lot of you all's poems, there's nothing in there that I'm not getting on first read, right? I mean, I could read it 3, 4, 5, 10 times through and probably get something more, something different each time, and that's as a good poem should be. But everything is there to be presented. You're not trying to hide something under a rock from me. So for you all, as craft persons of this art, where is the balance between being generous to your reader and trying to make something perhaps a little bit more finely wrought than like dialogue, right? What takes it from one to the other for you?
That's a good question, and I have given it really quite a lot of thought over the couple of years here. For me, accessibility, being able to connect with the reader, is paramount. I just talked about unity. I just talked about getting together with another person on a common topic or a common subject and talking about it. So it is extremely critical to me. And also, I got my master's degree as a graduate assistant teaching composition. And so what do you teach in comp? Know your audience, right? Write to your audience. Well, I kind of stuck. But even the poems I wrote back then were targeted toward somebody else reading the darn thing.
I think for me, what makes poetry different from an essay, for example, is what's not said. And so I hope that even though my poems, I think accessible is a dirty word, but I do hope that there's a certain amount of emotional weight that isn't being explicitly explained, but that still is powerful. That moment on the sidewalk in Tejan, for example, if that were written as an essay, then of course it'd be a lot more detailed. I'd talk about my reactions, the reactions of the people around me, so on and so forth. What did I do after? But the poem, I think part of it is what is not said, what's left for the reader to engage and to try to enter. And so even though it's accessible, I hope that it's not, overly explicit, if that makes sense. And I think that's the balance that I try to reach in my poetry. And I typically, when I teach poetry to my students, when I say the word poetry, of course, the first reaction is like, oh God, no. Because I think sometimes poetry is taught like a patient euthanized on a table. Like, we kill our poetry by examining it. Here's the heart, here's the liver, here's the, it takes all the magic away. But when I read to them somebody like Mary Oliver or Naomi Shihab-Nye or poets who are accessible but just so beautiful and rich and deep and meaningful, that's when my students are fascinated. That's when they're caught. That's when you can see. And I don't know if we do a good job explaining this, the magic that happens by the words under the words, and so I don't know if I do that with my poetry, but that's my aim.
Sure. I love it. I love that I asked a random question. You both had really good thoughts, so thank you for thinking about this, despite the fact that you had no idea it was coming. I'm going to ask my last question, and then we will make a couple of announcements before we go. This is my usual last question. I don't remember if you knew this was coming, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. So I'll start by giving you my answer to give you time to not listen to me and to think on your own. So I stole this practice from Al Phil Reese. He's at Penn, and he closes all of his podcasts with Gathering Paradise. So I'm going to ask you to think about a new book you discovered, a new poet you discovered, a poem that's just been lighting you on fire. I'll let you cheat and talk about a podcast or television program or movie if you like. I just said program, like it was 1982. Right? Something hopefully artistic that is really, just really rowing your boat these days. So I'll start by giving you two, and I will begin by cheating and give you a podcast. Rainn Wilson, the guy who played Dwight on The Office, has started a whole series of like a little kind of media company called Soul Pancake. You may remember Kid President back in the day, and the little African-American kid who was like president in the cute videos during the Obama era, and nobody remembers what the hell we're talking about. He has a new company called Soul Boom. He wrote a book, he has a podcast, and he really talks about just really current, accessible conversations around just kind of current sociological concerns, but through a spiritual lens, and a very widely spiritual lens. He himself is of the Baha'i faith. So it's really, really fascinating. And it's just dope because it's everybody from Jonathan Haidt to Bryan Cranston to Whitney Cumming. So you have these like stand-up comics and sociologists, and it's just fantastic. Strongly recommend. My second recommendation, now that you've had a little time to think about it, is go back and read all those dystopian novels you read in high school that you forgot about. I just started 1984, and I'm 20 pages in, and let me tell you, the parallels with the last decade is just flabbergasting. I mean, 3 times a page, I'm like, that's impossible. How did he know that in 1949? So, George Orwell's 1984. Okay, your turn.
Okay. So I have to admit, I read a poem in The New Yorker, and usually I read the poems in The New Yorker, and they're the opposite. They're not accessible, and then I'm reading it, I'm going, what does this mean? How am I supposed to enjoy this? But I did read one from Maggie Smith, and I fell in love with Maggie Smith. And of course, at first I was like, the actress is writing poetry, and then I went to Maggie Smith, and it's not. But what I find so fascinating with her poetry is that she's a mom too, and so much of her poetry has to do with children and the female body and just the struggles of and the joys of being a woman. And so I kind of fell in love with Maggie Smith. And also the latest, the Yiddish Police Union that I just finished by Chabon. Anyway, we read it for book club that we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks, Christmas. But I found that fascinating and fun. It's a speculative fiction of alternate reality mixed in with a detective novel, and I don't like detective fiction. Mysteries are not my thing, but I liked this one. So if you're looking for that crossover novel to get you interested in like detective stories, then check it out. Okay.
Nice. Love it.
I mentioned in my introduction Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. Highly recommended. As I said, I won't say anything more about it except it's highly recommended by me anyway. And then I've been reading Rodney Jones, Salvation Blues right now. And man, that kid, this is old as I am, that man talks to me. He came from the same country I came from.
The microphones.
So, where did I buy that? Anyway, Rodney Jones, Salvation Blues. Travis turned me on to that guy, and he, like I said, speaks to me very, very clearly. Although his poems tend to go on a little long. I can tolerate it.
Thank you both. Can we start by please applauding these poets? So our next reading, and it'll be our last reading of 2024, is going to be on October 22nd, and we will continue, as we have done throughout this entire year, our theme of kind of poetry and community. I somehow convinced the two co-hosts of the Reborn reading over at on Cherokee Street, the Fortune Teller Bar, to be our 2 readers in October. So Matthew Freeman and Murdy Riley are going to be here. I'm really, really pumped about that. So I hope we don't get too meta talking about like hosting poetry readings, but I think it'll be a really fun evening. So please check that out. If you are watching this video after August 27th, continue to interact with it, continue to share it, continue to ask us questions. We'd love to stay involved with you. Thank you again to Melissa, to Mark for reading this evening. Thank you to Aaron for being my wizard behind the curtain. Thank you to all of you in person for showing up in this disgusting heat to watch live poetry. Take care of yourselves and have a good night.